Henrietta is a coach, strategist, writer, educator based in London. She always struck me as someone wise who always has relevant insights into life. She is a healed healer who has overcome various hardships and decided to help others through the Barefoot Institute, co-founded with her husband, and Heartsmart, her private practice, which is also the title of one of her books.
Hello and welcome. I am today with Henrietta Szovati. Can you just tell me very quickly about Barefoot Institute and Heartsmart?
So Heartsmart is something I do by myself. It's my private practice. It's an idea that I have worked on with my first book. And it's a consultancy that helps people finding the coherence between their head and their heart. So it's essentially a coaching business, but I offer trainings and I consult companies and organizations, and I work with leadership development based on Heartsmart. Barefoot Institute is something we set up with my husband because we feel really passionate about improving and developing better Muslim relationships within the family context. So we see couples together, we train, we run workshops, we do premarital counseling. We basically take you through the whole journey of before marriage, during marriage, crisis, after marriage. So it's a whole scope of work that we do, specifically helping Muslim couples to better their relationship.
I'm very, very curious about the whole journey, how it came into place. Can you tell me a bit more about the book, how the idea came, and what is the book about?
The idea was born out of a very difficult period of my life. About 12 years ago, I was struggling with my emotional makeup generally. I couldn't find direction for my life. I was homeschooling both of my children, and I was overwhelmed, as you can imagine, trying to run a business and homeschooling my children at the same time. And I had this burning passion to write books. That's all I knew. I didn't know anything else. And I attended a wonderful training, which probably was for a number of weeks, which was to do with neuroscience. And it's not neuro-linguistic programming, it's actually the science of the brain and emotions. And it's a solid science, which is now very, very popular. But when I was training, very, very few of us were actually equipped with the tools and the understanding of how the brain works. And as I was studying it, I realized that it's very much in line with our Islamic tradition. And I started reading up upon what Islam says about the heart and the brain connection, and then teaming it up with science. And the more I recognized how amazing and powerful it was, the more inclined I became that actually what I want to do is I want to try this concept for myself first and then write up a book. So I moved over to Spain with my two children. And I spent, while they were at school, I spent my time writing the book and exploring the concepts and coming up with new ideas and tools. So it's partially a biography, an autobiographic piece about my travels and where I found my heart throughout my life. So it was a really good reflection for me to go back in my past and look at, where my heart has been. And then the other side of the book, the other part of the book, is my experiences with my clients and with myself of how that concept came into practice. And then I also offer a lot of practical tools and ideas how people can actually pick this up and do it for themselves.
So would you describe yourself as, if you've heard the term before, as a healed healer in a way?
I think all of us are. Anyone who does this kind of work, helping other people, we have to do our own journeys first, because we can't help other people unless we understand where we needed help. I always say to people, whoever is a coach, a therapist, or working with people in these leadership development capacities are people who have gone through some parts of the path. It doesn't mean that we are perfect at all. We still make mistakes. We still have faults, and we will continue to make mistakes. But the idea is that we have some tools that we can offer because we are familiar with the process. And for me, aligning my head with my heart was always very important, because I always valued intellect and understanding, and I still do. But I also value equally the passion and the fire that comes from the heart. And I think the world would be a different place if we could be more coherent about these things within ourselves, because then families, communities, and countries could be a little bit more coherent about what they do.
Mm-hmm. On your personal blog, and so all the links are in the description, and I'll put them up at the end of the video. So you write a lot about Andalusia.
Yes.
And so what inspires you about Andalusia, and what are the stories about? Is it like fiction? Tell me a bit more.
So you can tell I just light up the minute someone says Andalusia, because I consider it my home. So when we were living there with the children, they were 5 and 8 when we moved there, and I didn't know a lot about the history or anything like that. And because my children went to school, I followed the curriculum, because they didn't speak a word of Spanish when we arrived. So I followed the curriculum, and I was very, very surprised to see that the 800 years of Muslim ruling is taught in 1 or 2 lessons in the curriculum. So that made me very, very curious. But also because we were living on the land, I could literally feel history in my bones. That we lived in a beautiful little town called Ronda, which is about 35,000 people, with a beautiful gorge, but it has an incredible history, Muslim history, that not many people talk about. So I created a Muslim trail, and I put it up on my blog, anybody who wants to visit. There are a number of monuments that are not mentioned in guidebooks. So at the weekends when I was there with the children, I just chucked them in the car and I said, let's go and explore. And we discovered every single little important villages. We went to little towns. We spoke to people. We were looking for Arab castles. We went to the Alhambra. We went to Cordoba. So I became absolutely fascinated with the lifestyle, the culture. And what was quite interesting is, while I was on this movement of finding out as much as I could, I realized that when I was a little girl, at the age of about 9 or 10, medieval history was always my favorite. That was the only part I could connect in Hungary when I was born and I studied. We had the Ottoman Empire, and that was always the best, most exciting, most rejuvenating part of my learning. So I was very much at home. Sometimes I say to my friends and other people, like, I'm a medieval woman by nature, because I just love medieval manuscripts, and I love getting lost in old dusty libraries. And of course, when you are in Cordoba, you see all of that alive, because the walls speak stories. So there were a lot of stories, and so the stories I write short stories. I usually pick an unknown or unsung hero from Andalusi history, and I create a fiction around it somehow, and I weave into a lot of learnings and all of that. But my second novel, my second book, which is a historic fiction, it's a novel. It's called The Bookseller of Cordoba, in which I picked a wonderful woman who was a real figure. Her name is Lubna of Cordoba, and she was the secretary of Abdurrahman II, and she was the caretaker of the library, and she was cataloging, and she was an incredibly intelligent woman. So I created a story around her. So the story takes place in 9th century Cordoba, and it ends a couple of decades later. And the whole story is about her journey going over to Baghdad and gathering books and bringing it back. And the whole culture of a couple of things: the culture of women, the culture of learned and educated group of people in Andalus that we hardly ever talk about today in history. Even our historical learning isn't laced with any of these really important facts. But I believe that this is where European Islam started from. There is an element that somewhat gets washed out from curriculum, from conversations, from politics even, and I just don't want it to be lost. So every time I go, even now, I spend a lot of time there. I'm looking for stories under the stones, and I walk and I find something and I think about something. So I want those figures to be alive for us, because they are very similar to the kind of figures that we have in our society today. And I think there's so much we can learn from that society. So that's what makes me excited about Andalus.
Talking about Andalus, so it has always puzzled me why are these figures you're talking about always kind of forgotten, not only in the mainstream English or European curriculums, but as well when it comes to the various Muslim communities here in the UK or in Europe. This is a part of history that is often romanticized because of the golden age and stuff, but people don't go much into the details and know that you had these amazing people. And what do you think is the reason for that?
I think part of it is lack of education. And one of the reasons why I actually still go there and I take groups there and I run retreats on that land is because people are walking around, Muslims, British Muslims, walking around in flip-flops, and they have no idea what they are looking at. It's very easy to look at some of the literature that has been written, and we always have to be very careful of what we are reading, because history books are always written by who? We know. It's always written by people who want to do something, but very few Muslim publications have actually come out about this part of history. And you're right, there is a romantic side of it, which I think isn't correct, but neither is correct the complete opposite of the, representation that there was nothing there. The Spanish really would like to believe that there was nothing there and we can just wash it off because it's just one lesson, we can teach something. But actually the Spanish way of life, the way they think, the whole psychology of a Spanish people is very much like an Arab behavior. The language has 4,000 words that came from Arabic, so Spanish language is full with Arabic words. The way they think about agriculture, the entire systems have been built on or at the back of the Arab Muslim ruling. But we don't know these things, and until we really go and really learn and really understand where we come from, we will not be able to set the direction where we want to go as a community. I think we are very much focused on the very basics of Islam, which is to do with practices and dogmas and rituals, and that's a very important part of our growth. But as a convert, I've been a Muslim for 20 odd years. I think there is more to our existence than let's just do the basics, because really practicing Islam is just the basic. We actually need to look at where do we come from as a community, where is our lineage, where is our intellectual, spiritual, foundational root, and then how do we not leave the world without actually creating a legacy for the future generation. So I'm very passionate about teaching this to children. I would love this to be a separate curriculum item on all of our madrasas, all of our Islamic education institutions. But you think about this, I did my master's here in UK in one of the institutions. They didn't teach this in details. It's kind of there, but not really in a way that makes meaning for us. Whereas I think when you make the link with Spain, when you make the link with Europe, then we understand that we actually come from that tradition. There was a Sufi tradition in Spain, there was a scholarly tradition, the women, the poetry, all those things are unknown. And if we are not talking about this, it's going to get forgotten. I remember when I picked up, I think it was the Oxford Manual for Medieval Europe. Not a single mention about the 60,000 educated, literate Andalusi women who were writing poetry, copying the Quran, and doing all sorts of literary work. They opened their literary salons, and we don't know anything about these things. And I think it's really an important part of our journey and discovery in Europe, that where we come from.
How were your writings received by the public?
I did something interesting in lockdown. I haven't published my book, Seller of Cordoba, but I was reading it online. And I did a little bit of introduction before a couple of chapters was read out. And it was incredibly enriching. The conversations, and I think the thirst and the hunger for this kind of interesting, conversations. For example, we were talking about culinary delights that came from Andalus, and we were talking about medieval food and how our food culture is informed by, Arab cookery books and all of those things. Like something simple, but also the more important things about really understanding the place of Andalus. So I believe there is a huge hunger for it, and I think within the context of where I kind of function, I can see that people love the stories of Andalus. And I've taken groups, and I know many people who connect very deeply to the land. One of my participants said something amazing. She said, as an Arab woman, all part of my identity is welcomed on this land. And I think that's existing. That's in existence. I think what is not in existence is the promotion of this work, the publication of this work. It has been extremely difficult to publish because mainstream publishers are not interested. it's very obvious. They are not interested in powerful Muslim females, or they are not interested in stories that are talking about the beauties of that period or of that land. Or I can show you, I have enough rejection letters to show you that it has been very, very challenging, which is why I still haven't been able to publish. I believe it's a great book, but I'm being told that certain characters have to be changed and the storyline has to be changed, and I'm just not willing to compromise on that.
Yeah, which sadly is not very surprising for mainstream publishers. But did you try with Muslim publishers? And if so, what was the response?
I haven't, because I didn't want to go down the Muslim publisher route. I'm very, very conscious of not pigeonholing ourselves in doing publication just for Muslim audience, because I think one of the challenges with Muslim publishers is probably easier to get published by Muslims, but their marketing strategy and their audience is very much the Muslim audience. And while I want to do that, I also want other people who are non-Muslims to be interested and look at this period and our heritage as an equal, as opposed to just it's a Muslim thing and then we just have to look at it from a Muslim lens. I think I was very careful of not doing that, because I think I could have got it much easier and I probably would be published by now. But my idea is that the story of Andalus isn't the story of Muslims only. It's a story of humanity. And when we understand what was and what is going on about Andalus and its portrayal, then we understand what's going on in the world. And here comes my cat.
Which I think is a really good strategy. And you also mentioned in our conversations that you thought about also self-publishing, but it is understandably very, very difficult to, if you were to go that route.
Yes, self-publishing is the most difficult part of self-publishing is the marketing. And I've done it with my first book. I've sold about 5,000 copies by myself, with a lot of organizing and going to certain, you have to go to conferences, you have to go to events, and it takes up a lot of your time. I'm also selling online. I'm running workshops and also selling through there, but it's just a lot of time investment on the part of the writer, whoever is doing it. So in that time, I could write another book.
You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that one of the catalyst elements in your life journey was you had an event or a series of events that happened early on your journey. So what was the turning point, the main turning point in your life?
I think I have to say the biggest one was when I was 21, 22. Yeah, 21 or 22. I fell on a rock while we were out hiking, and at night, in the middle of the night, I fell on a rock and I lost my consciousness. And my skull broke, and I was in a coma for 3 days. And all I can remember was someone holding my head. The blood was oozing, and 3 days later I wake up with no hair and the tube sticking out of my head, and I looked like a Buddhist monk of some nature. And I had no religion, I had no spiritual path up to that point. But when I woke up, I could hear the doctor talking to my parents. My parents didn't know what happened because we were away from home and we went as a group of us. And my parents didn't have a clue what was going on. So they just got a phone call from one of my friends who said, please come to the hospital far away from my hometown, because she's in real danger. She's going to be operated and we need your consent and all of those things. So I woke up and I heard the doctor talking to my parents, and he said, look, I'm a doctor. I'm not a man of faith. I'm a man of science. But what happened to your daughter was not angels. It was God who saved her. And of course, I had no idea what it meant, because I didn't even know. Well, we had a Christian concept of God that we celebrated, on Christmas Day, but that was it really. I had no relationship with God. I had no God in my life. And when I started recovering, I spent a lot of time talking to this doctor who was on call, and we spent a lot of hours. And I said, look, I really want you to tell me, what did you mean by this is not angels? But what's the difference, angels and God? Even then, I didn't have a clue about the difference. And he said, look, you you have been saved in ways that I haven't seen. You should be in wheelchair by now because your skull went so close to your brain that it was literally a small fraction that saved your life. And this scientifically is very unlikely. So there must be a reason, there must be a bigger force for you to discover why you're still alive. And if you spend the rest of your life doing that, I think you will find the answer. And I argued with him. I said, look, I don't believe in God. I don't know what God is. My parents never taught me God. So I left the hospital, and those conversations really changed my life, because I came out of the hospital as a different person. Not just because I looked different. I literally looked like a Buddhist. I had to wear a turban on my head because I was bald and I couldn't get I had massive scars on my head. But also I started to sense life in a very different way. Everything had a meaning, everything had a purpose. And I wasn't scared of what's going to come because I was very close to death. So I knew it's going to be a peaceful thing. So I might just make my life peaceful for the rest of my life. So I started searching, and I became a Buddhist. First I became a vegetarian, and then I became a Buddhist. And then I started going into Hindu gatherings, and I was looking everywhere. But Islam was the last place to go because I was terrified of Islam. To be really honest, I was terrified of everything I heard about Islam, everything I read in the media, all of those things. But eventually I ended up with a really, really good job in the European Union. And one conference that we organized brought a lot of diplomats together from Brussels and all over Europe. And 2 of them were Muslims. And I was supposed to be looking after them in one of the conferences, and they kept saying, we don't need a drink, we don't need women, we don't need any of the, the shavings of this. And I became really, really curious. So I spent a lot of time asking questions like, tell me about your religion. So it was literally curiosity that put me through to those months until I gathered the courage, went to the local mosque. We had a couple of local mosques in the capital city of Hungary. And I started just learning calligraphy. I just got really enmeshed with the whole culture. Still not a Muslim because I was terrified. But I spent a good 4 or 5 years studying, literally studying people, because that's what I love doing. I love studying, sitting around people and gathering information. And before I was 26, I was ready. And that's where I decided that I want to become a Muslim. So I did that in my local mosque. So what I'm saying, I think what I'm trying to say is that it wasn't just one thing, one big thing. I think it was there was one big shock to my life, but there were a lot of small decisions I have taken that really was turning point for me. I think some people glorify that, it has to be one big thing. Yes, there is always one big event, but then we become responsible. And then I took a lot of small decisions until I felt that I was ready to actually become a Muslim.
Because I also believe that sometimes when it comes to change, sadly people have to experience one of these shocks where the worldview is put back into question, and before them to start the journey of questioning. Because some people go through these kind of shocks, but they continue as normal. And some people, well, it's the opposite. They try to find what's their place in the society, in life. And I remember reading your blog and you mentioning that at some point, a bit later on, after all these events, there was also some difficult times within your family. And
yes.
So my question is, if you're okay to talk about this, of course, what were they and how did you recover from all this?
So it's no secret. I grew up in a family where my father was an alcoholic, and that scars you for life, I believe. Any kind of childhood trauma does, but I think living with an alcoholic parent who was also abusive physically, not to us as children, but to my mother particularly, and seeing her struggle with him was really the cornerstone of all my childhood experiences. So I escaped a lot into my grandparents' farm, which was my haven and my safe space. And I think the only way to recover from anything that is so traumatic for a child. I remember I was only 3 or 4 years old when I knew I didn't have the words, but I had a sense that I can read people's emotions before I could read my own. So I numbed myself from that age all the way until I started my own training. And I'm not saying everybody should become a coach or therapist, but it helps, actually. Even if you don't run a business, some sort of therapeutic work I think it's essential. Especially the bigger the problem, the more there is a need for therapeutic intervention. And it could be, not everybody is living with alcoholism, but, extreme poverty, neglect, verbal abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. Now we can talk about spiritual abuse as well, because that's also part of the journey. So I think what I'm learning about this even now, that had I not done this for myself, I would have passed down the old patterns to my children, which I was very, very careful not to. Because once you have a very limited view of your life and who you are and your capacities and skills, then the rest of the world is blind spot. And you cannot empower other people, including your own children, your family, your spouse, unless you expand to the best of your ability. But you can't expand unless you make peace with what happened. Now, the other thing I see often is that people keep blaming their parents. Oh, my parents did this to me. Yes, we can acknowledge what our parents have done, but we cannot blame them for the rest of our lives. At some point, we have to take responsibility. Whatever happened, and again, when you look at the Islamic tradition and the understanding that Allah has not given us these experiences as a punishment. None of it was I don't look at it as punishment. I look at it was an opportunity for me as an adult to look back and make sense. As a child, we can't. We just go through, we try to survive, and we just do whatever we can. But at some point, we have to become an adult, grow up, really grow up, and look at our own life story with an adult mind. Not the victim, not the helpless child who can't do anything. It's an adult who understands something's happened, and what can I do with it? What did I learn? What did I become? Had I not had this experience with my father, what kind of person would I be? How did it enrich me as opposed to what did it take away from me? So I think this is something I'm very passionate about, because this is exactly what the brain does. The brain always goes for the negative, the things that didn't work, the blame, like I am the victim and all of that. But actually we have an equal capacity to be the hero of our own story. Because if we understand it from a different perspective, then we are not ignoring what has happened, but we are able to extract the learning and then take it forward. So we are not passing it down to our children, we are not hurting other people, we are not damaging our own relationships, but we can have a much better relationship with ourselves. Sorry, it was a bit of a long-winded answer.
It's very, very important, because I think lots of people share these kind of stories, but there's no much literacy about what can we do, when we have trauma, when we have all these problems from the past, how can we manage them and heal from them. So do you mean that you've managed to heal yourself by yourself, by asking yourself these questions and trying to put this in from different perspectives?
Part of it, yes, but I couldn't have done this without the help of other people. I even when I was starting my coaching training, I had my own coach. When I graduated, I have to had my own supervisor, I had my own therapist. I only recently finished therapy from a very, very many years of therapy. And I will go back again, because some things are going to change. And you see, we have to look at it in a way that 3 things I think are important. One is Allah is giving us opportunities to grow. And any opportunity we have in life, we have to grab it. Allah is not giving us anything as a punishment. I don't believe in a punishing God. I believe in a merciful God who is giving us an experience. And he said, look, I think you need to grow, so I'm going to give you a difficulty. I'm going to give you a challenge so I can test what you're made of. The second is we have to tie our camel. We have to do our work. I can not just sit at home and make dua and do nothing about my changes that needs to be happening. So I need to make a human effort. And the third is we have to ask for help. We have to do it with other people, whether it's our certain limitations, of course, on a spouse or an extended family member situation, but or therapist or a coach. We need to ask other people to give us their perspective, because again, when we have a blind spot, I can't see certain things about myself, no matter how well read I am about psychology, or I can write a master's about this, but I can't see my own bad behavior. I can't see why I'm failing in certain things. It has to be someone else who can give me this. So I think we are in a very, very fortunate position as Muslims, because we have the promise of Allah that He is always going to be looking after us. Number two, He's also teaching us that you are responsible for certain things. Tie your camel. And third, you are never alone. You're never alone in this, because I think a lot of people struggle and suffer. I see my clients when they come to me and they say, oh, I've been suffering for years. Why didn't you ask for help? Or I just didn't know where to go, or I was too scared. So I think we really need to get over ourselves and say, if I need help, I have somewhere to go, I have got to go to, and I've got myself. And this is a really crucial element, because if you trust yourself enough, you will always be able to do some part of the healing, not all of it, but some part of the healing you can do by educating yourself, by reading up upon things, by communicating with people about who have going to groups and talk about your experiences. So some part of it, and very deep self-reflection, is very helpful. But it's not just a one person's journey. This is what binds us together. This is what we need to do, because the believers are like mirrors to each other. So we are just holding up a mirror and helping each other better ourselves. That's what a true relationship is about. When they see the best in you, you see the best in them, and you help them overcome the weaker parts. It's not about loving someone because it's perfect. It's about loving the broken is harder.
Thankfully, through social media and other means, more people are aware when they have certain issues. But one thing I've been observing still in the past years is so many people, although they are aware they may have XYZ condition and stuff, it seems that the hardest thing is for people to ask for help or even talk about these kind of things with a friend. And I see so many people keeping all of this to themselves. And do you know why is it like that?
Since you mentioned social media, I think there's a very dangerous thing going on in social media. I think talking about problems is not a problem, because it's an open jungle, it's an open platform. And often people fall into the trap that they do it because they get likes, or they get recognized, or they can build a business around it, or whatever. And I know it's in my field, because I've seen enough of this kind of behavior that, people tell their stories, and then they, in a weekend, they become a coach, and suddenly they can heal everybody else. And I think that's a very dangerous thing to do. But also, people pick up language of talking about trauma, but they are not willing to go deeper in understanding how to heal from the trauma. It's a different thing to recognize and say, okay, I've got this. And I don't know if you noticed, but in the last couple of years, everyone is walking around with a different vocabulary. Trauma and the words that they used to belong to the therapy room, now words are flying around. And I think that's also dangerous, because the people who are doing it are not often qualified to deal with this kind of difficulties. So, I walk down my high street and I can hear people talking on the phone about traumas and all of this. And I think trauma has to be kept in a sacred space. It has to be in a sacred relationship with your therapist, with your coach, whoever is helping you. There has to be a report. There has to be a container where it doesn't spill everywhere, but it's kept in a sacred space. So you deal with it. Because when it's sacred, then you can honor it. If everyone is talking about it in the supermarket, it's not honoring growth. It's not honoring development. It's just talking about it and getting it out with the words. But the deeper work isn't about just talking about it. The deeper work is to really shift something inside of you. And when something triggers, your response is going to be different. And I think for me, the sanctity of healing with social media seems to be going. And that always puts my alarm up, because I've seen that it can do a lot of damage to people. They think they are healing just by talking about it on social media, but it's not the talking necessarily. It's the deeper layers of understanding of your psyche, finding a deeper rooted confidence, a grounded self, free from the trauma. That doesn't just come through talking about it in public. It's much easier to talk about it in public, actually, and people like attention. Imagine an extrovert. They would love an attention. But an introvert would be very, very different. And I think keeping in mind that if you have the sanctity of healing, whatever context you set up for that, that's a much more meaningful process than the public and open. And I think, everything is done by algorithms nowadays, so we have to be very careful. Whatever words you use, similar kind of adverts are going to come because of the algorithm, so you will bump into these things. So it's important that we don't lose sight of these things, and we just remain critical, like, who is the right person for me? What's the sanctity? What is the work I need to do within myself before I can go and help other people? Don't jump and run trying to help other people. Like, it takes years, actually. And I always say to coaches, you train yourself as a coach, give yourself 2 years before you even start thinking about helping other people, because it's not a joke. We are holding people's lives in our hand.
On the other end of the spectrum, what makes it so difficult for people to reach out for help?
I think it's because they deep down know that there is a lot of work they need to do. They know that it's a process. They know it's not going to be glorious. They know it's not going to be glamorous. And that scares people. And, there's an implication. There are financial implications. There is a commitment issue here. There's a lot of pieces that need to be in place for any real growth and improvement to happen. Is a few pieces have to be really in place. Also, I think, I'm not sure if it's changing. I can see it in my children, that the school system is slightly different now. So there is pastoral care is a little bit more available, a lot more, in some schools, a lot more available. We didn't have pastoral care. But the reason why we didn't need pastoral care as much is because we had a community around us. Whereas today, young children have no community. We have to make an effort to find a community. It takes a village to raise a child, right? We know this. We need to find, for them, spaces which are outside of the family where they can wriggle themselves and they can find out who they are, and then when they come back to the home, then we can rectify and see some of those things, what they are saying, and their identity is being shaped. So I think young people have more platforms to talk about these things, but they have less community connections to try out these things. So it's a bit of a give and take, I think it looks to me, because when we were growing up, all these mental health issues, we never talked about this, but we had a community. It doesn't mean it didn't exist. We had these issues, but we had a community that was a bit of a buffer. Now we don't have the community because everything is so dispersed and the society works in a very different way. So we need to bear in mind that people will find the work itself challenging because it comes with a lot of struggle.
And talking about community always makes me think of talking about home, because I maybe naively associated the two terms very often. But my next question would be, before going to Andalus, did you struggle to find yourself a home or a place you can call home?
Oh, this was one of the questions I always battle with, because I grew up in Hungary, never really feeling Hungarian. For some odd reason, I always felt like something was different about me, that I didn't fit into my family. I didn't understand why they were the way they were. A lot of things I couldn't accept, I couldn't embrace. I always felt like somewhat outside of my own family, even though I had a loving relationship with my mother particularly, and we still have a very good relationship. But something about, and I remember when I was leaving, I left first when I was 17. And I finally left when I was 24. And my best friend from school, she said to me, like, you never really belonged here. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, you were here. You were always here physically, but your soul was somewhere else. So when I left, I became a Muslim and I went to Egypt. I lived in Egypt for a year. I felt like it was home. Then I came to England. Then I felt I've been here for 20 odd years. I feel like it's home. And I go to Spain. That's my home. That's my spiritual home. So I don't have this concept of home in one place anymore. But I can't remember, one of the Hungarian writers, he said that I am the citizen of the world, which I love that concept, because you find what you're looking for wherever you go. It doesn't have to be one physical space. Although for me, one physical space is always going to be Andalusia, because there are other things that land gives me that no other place in the world can. So I think it's individual for everyone. If your definition of home is about your connection with the people, then you will find it where your family is. And for me, England is that, because London, my family is here, my children, they never want to live anywhere else, so they will not come with me to Spain even if I wanted to. If we talk about relationships, my other home is Hungary, where my mother is. If I talk about where I am at my best pace and rhythm and the lifestyle, it has to be Andalusia for me. Everything agrees with me. The land speaks to me. The stones are talking to me. I don't feel that in England. I don't feel it in any other parts of the world. So I think we have multiple homes.
That's a very interesting way of putting it. Would you say the same could be true with what we call community?
Yes, actually, I think so, because now in a certain age, as I can say about myself, after a certain age, I think wherever you go, you will find your community as well. Because, so this particular place where we live in North London, we moved here about a year ago, and we lived about 10 minutes away from here. And as soon as we came, we connected with the local mosque, and we are even setting up a local mosque, and the communities around. You find the people that you're looking for. When I go to Spain, I've got the community in Spain. As soon as I land, I know where to go. I know who's waiting for me. I know where there's a meal for me. When I go to Hungary, not so much in Hungary because my mother is not there anymore, but I think it's community for me is a group of people who understand and who want to think with me. I think that's my definition. That's probably the best definition I can give for myself. That if people want to think with me, then I can work with that community. I can be with them. Because then we wrestle out, we figure out what we want to do as a community. But people who are there to criticize me, to oppose me, to ask millions of unnecessary questions, people who want to put blocks in front of me, that's not my community, and that's not the space I need to be. And it sometimes happens within families, unfortunately. And I think for converts particularly, especially when they have intercultural marriages, which is very likely, that cultural difference is going to come out at some point in our life. And we just have to be really clear about this. There's certain things we can do as converts, but other things we can't, because it's not Islamic, it's cultural. So particularly women, I know a lot of sisters who are in this kind of conundrum that certain things are given to them as a way of, this is how Islam is, but actually it's a very cultural interpretation. So I remember about 20 years ago, we had a group of Hungarian converts. All of us, 10, 15 of us, all of us were married to a different culture. And when we sat down, we could not have a conversation about Islam, because everybody was coming with the cultural baggage, Pakistani, South African, whatever, Algerian, whatever we were married to, it was very, and it wasn't a community really, because it was about wrestling with ideas, and we couldn't think together. We couldn't think for each other or with each other. We could just butt our heads, because we didn't agree how to raise our hands when we are praying, or where to put the hand exactly, or move the finger or not move the finger. So these things, they are important, I understand that, but they are not the defining element of a community. A community is where there is mutual respect, communities where there is mutual understanding, and there's a goodwill at the bottom of all of it. For me, that's what defines a community.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting way of putting it. A community based on values and ideas as opposed to cultural ethnicity and so on. But this group of people you have now around you, is it something that stumbled upon you, or is it something you actively try to build?
I think we are always looking for community in some ways, maybe not so consciously. And I'm certainly not. I'm an introvert by nature, so I love one-to-one conversations. I don't like big groups. I love meaningful conversations. I don't do small talks. I don't go to networking events because I can't bear them. I hate them. But I'm a really good conversationalist. I love having good conversations with someone who takes the time and cares about what I say, or what I care about what they say, instead of just patting each other on the back and say, "Oh, lovely to see you," but actually no real connection. So I think we are always looking. I don't think we are looking for our community necessarily. We are looking for our tribe, which is the people who may not be the same in terms of what we think and how we think, but we have a goodwill for each other. I think for me that would be maybe an extended version of what a community is, that it doesn't have to be how we view the world in exactly the same way. In fact, the more diversity, the better it is, in my opinion. But there has to be mutual respect at the bottom of all of it, and there has to be a goodwill. So if someone wants to become, I've got a lot of friends who I consider them to be my tribe, because I know I can call them at 2:00 in the morning if I'm struggling with something, and they will pick up the phone and I can have a conversation because they know it's important. I wouldn't bother them otherwise. So, and they can do the same with me. And I think it's a lost art how we relate to people anymore, because we are so insular. We are so much around our own families. And I think I look at it in a way that, for example, I've never had sisters in my life. I have an amazing group of women around me that I can call anytime I want, and they can call me anytime they want, because we have this invisible, threads of connection. And for me, that's a very, very purposeful and very meaningful way of being.
What are the most important lessons or ideas you think you really wish you had when you were younger?
I wish I had been educated about how to be in the world. And I'm talking about emotional and social education. I mean, socially, now let me retract it. Socially, I was in a very good place, because I grew up in a small village with an amazing community around my parents, which was wonderful. But emotionally, I was not equipped for any of the things that was coming on my way. And it wasn't part of a conversation, it wasn't part of a curriculum. We just kind of felt like, when I look back at it, it felt like we were all trying to survive something, whatever that was. And remember, Hungary was a communist country, so we had the Russians with us for a glorious 40 years. So talking about these emotional issues were not part of the curriculum. I wish someone would have helped me articulate how to have a sense of self, which I think a lot of children lose at a very young age. And no matter how conscious you are as a parent, I kind of participated actively in my children's lives, because I homeschooled them and I could see them developing, and I could give whatever I could give to them. Partially I homeschooled because I knew that they will not get what I didn't get at school either. So I think for me it was a really important part of the process, not to just send them off to school and get rid of them and use the school as a facility for babysitting or a television for babysitting, because this is where I think I lost my identity and a sense of self. And what I mean by sense of self is to know what I think, to have the courage to have an opinion about certain things and be able to articulate this, stand up for certain things that I believe was important. Or, just like in my case, I have always been an introvert. Quiet doesn't mean that she doesn't have an opinion. Quiet doesn't mean that she's not courageous. Quiet doesn't mean that she's not smart. Quiet doesn't mean that she doesn't want to do something about certain things. But I have a different way of doing things. I don't like loud presence in a way that is overbearing, overpowering. I just get shut down. And I don't know if you come across this work, but one of the coaches that I trained with, she talks about the power of the introverts, and this whole polarization, as we were growing up, was never clear. And a lot of my friends, we get lost in the world of the extroverts, trying to be one of them, but by nature, none of us were really extroverted. And I think that struggle, I wish someone had told me, just take it easy. You don't have to become somebody you are not. You just have to be who you are. And I think for me, that's really was missing from my education. I wish there was someone who would have said, just have the courage to be who you are.
And talking about then education in kids, because we obviously know that sadly the school doesn't teach like all these life skills. And you've been homeschooling, and so according to you, what would you say are the most important skills or idea to equip kids with?
So funny enough, my children are always complimented about how social they are and how easy they are with adults. And I think one of the things that homeschooling does is that, for me, the idea, just remember, the idea that your child is going to be sitting with 30 other children of exactly the same age for 8 hours a day is called education currently. All across the world. I don't agree with that. I think children have to be with multi-generational setups. They have to have the elders, they have to have the younger ones, they have to have the same age. But most importantly, when they are doing any kind of learning, the only way they will be interested is that they are learning with the people who are interested in the same thing. 30 children are not going to be all of them are interested in science. Half of them probably will be interested in maths, the other half is interested in arts, or maybe less, I don't know the proportion. But we cannot enforce on children to learn in one particular set of ways, which is what the school system is now. 11 plus exams, it's not about knowledge, it's about how quickly you can just fill in a paper. It's nothing to do with knowledge. For me, knowledge is to be able to read a room when you enter, to be able to recognize someone needs help, to be able to deal with adults in a respectful way. It doesn't matter how old you are. It's about being able to see that a young child needs support. How can I help her? It's about understanding how I can function in the world, to do my own laundry, to do my own cooking, to look after my surroundings, to look after my environment, to look out for my community. So for me, it's a whole spectrum of things other than what they would learn at school. Knowledge and learning is not from books. It's from life. So it's the other day, I was talking to somebody and we were talking about homeschooling. And my kids were not with me. And she asked me, so, this homeschooling, your kids must be really, really nerdy and weird and antisocial. And here comes my daughter, who is now almost 18. And she comes, we start chatting and we talk to each other. I didn't introduce her as my daughter. And off she goes to back to her friend. And this lady who I was talking to, she said to me, what an articulate, amazing young lady. And then I said, yes, my daughter. No. And I think for me, that's, people have perceptions about homeschooling, of course. But I think life is not about school in a traditional sense. It's about learning how to be with yourself, how to carry yourself, how to be confident, how not to lose a sense of self, how to have an opinion. And all of these things are taken away from children when they're at school. Because if you don't fit into a particular set of testing, you need special education needs, or you have you need someone to support you. And actually what we are doing is we are squashing children's sense of who they are. So life is more than that. Life is so many things. One of the things that I always say this, because one of the things I always did with my kids, I always gave them physical work. And they always remember. We used to live in a house where the lino has some grains in it. So it wasn't a smooth lino. It wasn't easy to clean. And every 3 to 4 months, I would just throw a massive bucket of water and soap on the floor. I gave them scrubs. We went on our knees, all three of us, and we were scrubbing. And that's what they remember. The experience of taking care of their environment, of me being with them and laughing with the soap. And they still remember, they are adults now practically, but they still remember, Mom used to make us work, but that was the best work we have ever done, because we learned how to take care of the little things. Because when you do that, then you can take care of it's a part of discipline. And again, disciplining a child isn't about telling the child 50 times, sit down and be quiet, like they do at school. That's not disciplining. That's a dictatorial command. And if you don't comply, you are a bad child. So can you see how many times during the day in the child's life at school, they are given labels, and then children take those labels and then they act out, and then it's a completely different person. Someone who is quiet is not celebrated for the quietness, shy, can't do the work, and after a while, the child starts believing, I don't know how to do the work, and I am bad, and there's so many ways you can take a soul of a child, depending on what label we give them. And I think homeschooling is a wonderful place not to give labels to children, but really celebrate. My kids are 2 completely different kids in terms of how they learn, what they like, completely different. And I had to teach them in a very different way. I can't imagine teaching them the same way. It just wouldn't have worked. So it's important for parents to recognize that you are not powerless. You have the power to shape and mold the future of your child in any way you want. But you have to listen to the child. You have to really look at the child and feel the soul of it, and soul of him or her, and really hold them for who they are, and not just give them to someone to mold them into what they think they should be, because the system requires them to be in a particular way.
Is there anything important you would like to add or to talk about?
Maybe one thing that I want to say to people that I have learned through all these experiences that we talked about today, I don't want people to be scared of being critical of what they see around themselves. I think if there's anything that is taking this world down, is this unifying or unified thinking that is imposed on us. I'm particularly upset with social media on this one, because conversations and identities are being formed and informed by algorithms. And I want people to go back to basics. I really want to encourage people to be critical about, for example, when they see something, be critical about this. Is this true? It could be a made-up story. Now that AI coming out, anything we see, we have to look with double, triple checking. Is this true, or is it an artificially generated image? Is this true, or is it a message that is coming out from, what propaganda is coming out from? I want people to really step back and think for themselves in everything. Thinking about your own children's education. Think about your own relationship. Don't go with others. Don't go with the majority. Don't go because someone looks great. Think for yourself. And if there is any message I always give to people, is think for yourself. Don't let other people make you think that they know better, but be critical. Examine everything, study everything, and go to the root of everything. But whatever you do, that thought must be yours, not someone else's. Don't pick up slogans. Don't pick up trends just because they are trendy. Being ourselves is the hardest thing to do. Everyone says, just be yourself. It's actually a very difficult thing to be, because you will find opposition, people will not like it. But if you lose that, you have lost everything.
I think I completely agree on that. Thanks again, Henrietta, for your time and for these wonderful insights. And thanks everyone for watching once again. And until next time, take care of each other and yourselves.